Okay, here we are for our last unit, Unit 6 on Geometry, and our first lesson, Lesson 1, Complementary and Supplementary Angles. You're going to need a protractor for this lesson. So let's review some vocabulary. Go ahead and fill this out as we go along. First term is adjacent. Two angles, angle AOC and angle COB with common side of OC, are adjacent angles if C is in the interior of angle AOB. We have vertical and vertically opposite. When two lines intersect, any two non-adjacent angles formed by those lines are called vertical angles or vertically opposite angles. Two lines are perpendicular if they intersect in one point and any of the angles formed by the intersection of the lines is 90 degrees. Two segments or rays are perpendicular if the lines containing them are perpendicular lines. So we have adjacent angles, and we would abbreviate that as angles and then ADJ for adjacent. If we have vertical angles, then we use vert, V-E-R-T, and then the angle, and if we have more than one, obviously, we put an S at the end of it. Angles on a line would just be angles, the symbol for angles, and then on a line. And angles at a point would be angles at a point. So angles on a line refers to two angles on a line whose measurements sum to 180 degrees. Could we use this fact if the two angles are not adjacent, but their measurements still sum to 180 degrees? Could we still call them angles on a line? Well, no, it would not be appropriate because the angles no longer sit on a line. It would be nice to have a term for non-adjacent angles that sum to 180 degrees, since 180 degrees is such a special value in geometry. We can make a similar argument for two angles whose measurements sum to 90 degrees. It would be nice to have a term that describes two angles that may or may not be adjacent to each other, whose measurements sum to 90 degrees. So let's look at some other geometric ideas. So here we have a diagram of two angles that are adjacent to each other and then two angles that are not adjacent. However, if the sum of the measurements of two angles is 90 degrees, then the angles are called complementary. Each angle is called a complement of the other. So they can either be adjacent or they can be non-adjacent. The same thing with supplementary angles. If the sum of the measurements of two angles is 180 degrees, then the angles are called supplementary. Each angle is called a supplement of the other. Notice how they can be adjacent, but they don't need to be. They could be separate angles as long as they sum up or add up to 180 degrees. So let's take a look at exercise 1. In a complete sentence, describe the relevant angle relationships in the diagram. Write an equation for the angle relationship shown in the figure and solve for x. Confirm your answers by measuring the angle with a protractor. So for the first one, the angles x degrees and 22 degrees are supplementary, and they sum to 180 degrees. So you would write an equation, x plus 22 is equal to 180. So in order to solve using our algebraic rules, we would subtract 22 from each side, which leaves us with x is 158. So that means the measure of the angle that is unknown is 158 degrees. All right, let's do some review of operational vocabulary. More than, increased by, exceeds by, and greater than. less than, decreased by, and less than, etc. We have times, twice, doubled, product of, and we can have half or any fractional term such as 1/3 of, or out of, or ratio of. So what does it mean for two angle measurements to be in a ratio of 1 to 4? Explain using a tape diagram. Well, two angle measurements in a ratio of 1 to 4 can be represented as follows. If x is 1, then that means 4x would have to be 4 times x. Once we have expressions to represent the angle measurements, they can be used to create an equation depending on the problem. We will draw a tape diagram for example 1. So example 1. The measures of two supplementary angles are in the ratio of 2 to 3. Find the two angles. So if we draw a tape diagram, we would have 2x, because we know we have 2 times some number, and then we have 3 times that same number, and both of those are going to add up or sum up to 180 degrees because they say they're supplementary angles. So in order to solve this algebraically, we would have 2x plus 3x is 180. We can combine like terms, so 2x plus 3x is 5x. And now some number times 5 is 180, so we multiply by the reciprocal, or the multiplicative inverse, of 5, which is 1/5. And therefore we do 1/5 of 180, which gives us 36. So in that case, if x, or the missing unknown number, is 36, then one angle, or angle 1, is 2 times x, which means it would be 2 times 36, or 72 degrees. And the other angle, angle 2, is 3 times x, which would be 3 times 36, which is 108 degrees. And you can check that because 72 plus 108 is 180. All right, using the process from example 1, complete exercises 1 and 2. Check your answers after each one by continuing the video. All right, you should be done with exercise 1. Go ahead and check your answers by pausing the video, and then when you're done, go ahead and do the next one. All right, let's look at example 2. Two lines meet at a common vertex of 2 rays. Set up and solve an appropriate equation for x and y. Well, if we have 16 plus y is 90 degrees, notice how we have this 90-degree angle right here. That is marked by the little square here inside the angles. So this 16 plus y, we know has to be 90 degrees. So in order to solve for y, we would subtract 16 from both sides, and y would equal 74. So y is now equal to 74. But now we also know that x and y is 180 degrees because they sit on this line right here. They are angles on a line. So x is, and hopefully you can see this, x is actually the 90 degrees plus this little segment here. But again, x and y sit on 180 degrees, so if we know that y is 74, then x plus 74 is 180. Subtract 74 from both sides, and x is 106. So therefore x is 106 degrees and y is 74 degrees. All right, let's wrap this up. To determine the measurement of an unknown angle, we must identify the angle relationships and then model the relationship with an equation that will yield the unknown value. If the sum of the measurements of two angles is 90 degrees, angles are complementary angles, and one is the complement of the other. If the sum of the measurements of two angles is 180 degrees, angles are supplementary angles, and one is a supplement of the other. All right, we'll see you in class.